Hello my dear sewing friends, and welcome to episode number 6, the final episode of Sew Easy Season 2. And today, let's go ahead and make together a vest. Now vests are actually really versatile and they're great for layering. And depending on what fabric you make them from, you can make them for any season. Now I'm sure you have seen this faux fur vest that my mom actually made for me more than 10 years ago, and I still wear it. It's lovely. You can make some really interesting combinations with it. But when it comes to today, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to be using fabric scraps from my vest, full yardage, or perhaps I could use this button-up shirt that I could upcycle as well. So I haven't made up my mind just yet. But another reason why we're talking about vests today is because they're really easy when it comes to pattern drafting. So I figure let's go ahead and get started on this first. To begin, as always, we will need to choose a base. Now in my case, I will be going for a bodice block with a dart. Now in your case, you can go for that as well, or perhaps if you don't have a bodice block, you can also go for a button-up shirt that has a slightly relaxed fit, or a blouse, for example. Just be mindful that in that case, your adjustments to the pattern are going to be different than mine. Here I have started by tracing the front and the back of my woven bodice block with dart on the new piece of tracing paper. And so that way you can see a little bit better, I am outlining it in black. And yes, to address the elephant in the room, I do have a pink finger. I was dyeing fabric and there was a hole in the glove on my pinky, so yep. And just a fun fact, the color of the fiber reactive dye is called hot hibiscus. It's actually exactly the same color as I used on this shirt, but this shirt I made years ago. Today I was dyeing a different type of fabric, but I thought, you know what, would be fun to match. Now let's get started with the adjustments. And first I want to shorten my bodice blocks, and I will do it on both the front and the back. Next, let's tackle the shoulder. I want to bring each shoulder up just about let's say a 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. And then we're also going to open it up from both sides, from the neckline and the armhole. Now a good thing to mention is that I will do a very quick mock-up after these adjustments are done. So that way, if there are any other design element or adjustments that I need to do, I can do them without fearing that something is going to go wrong once I cut my fabric. Next, I also want to lower the armhole. Let's start with 1/2 an inch on both the front and the back, but of course you can take more or less if you'd like to. Now I am redrafting the armholes. Next, I want to add just a little bit at the side seam. Since my vest isn't going to be too puffy, let's do about 1/4 of an inch. And from here, I'm going to take a straight perpendicular line all the way down to the hem. On the front pattern piece, we're dealing with the darts. So in order to do that, just go ahead and fold in the dart like so, bring it all the way up. You can also cut it and then bring it together, whichever way is better for you. Take 1/4 of an inch to the side and then do a straight perpendicular line all the way down to the hem, as we did on the back pattern piece. I think I want the top to be slightly curved. So I might just curve in this part over here, and I might do the same on the bottom hem. As you can see, all we did was open it up in a couple of areas like the armhole, the neckline, and the shoulder seam. We also added a little bit of width at the side seam. In my case, I made it shorter. In your case, you can go longer. If you are going longer, you will need to take in consideration your hip width, so keep that in mind. But other than that, this is good to go, so I will do a quick muslin. All of the patterns that I work on, I draft without seam allowances, so I'm cutting them out as is, and I'll be adding the seam allowances as I cut my muslin or my main fabric. After I cut out the patterns, I also double check if all of the seams match, especially if I'm working with a thick marker, and usually that is for video purposes because that can yield some minor indiscrepancies, but it can yield indiscrepancies. So that's why when I do drafting on my own time, I always use just a sharp pencil. I have cut out my muslin, and now I'm going to quickly baste it together on my sewing machine so that way we can take a look at what we have. Now this is how this mock-up looks on the mannequin, and most importantly, this is how it looks on me. Now a quick note to add here is that this pink shirt is made from exactly the same base that I use for majority of my blouses and button-up shirts. And it's great to have it on because this type of garment mostly is going to be the one that I'm going to be wearing with this vest when it's done. That way I can tailor it exactly the way I want it to fit on top of this shirt. For example, I think I want to open up the neckline here just a tiny bit more and make it a little bit rounder. I also think that I probably want to make it a little bit shorter, like this, and perhaps add a slit at the side seam or perhaps a little curve. I also might open up the front armhole just by a little bit. Let's say, I don't know, how much is there, like 1/4 of an inch? Maybe I'll go for 1/2 inch. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do some sort of closures for my vest because right now it simply meets at the center front. But at this point, I'm taking off my muslin and I'm going to do all of the adjustments that we just discussed. Now let's try it on again. This is the new side, this is the old side. I like everything on the new side except one thing. Here at the neckline, I actually think I just want to sort of do a neckline like this one and curve it in over here. But other than that, I think we are ready to transfer all of the adjustments onto the pattern. This is going to be the final version of the pattern that I'm going to be using for the garment itself. So I need to transfer everything very carefully. And once I'm done, this is what I'm going to have for the front, and this is what I'm going to have for the back pattern piece. Now at this point the pattern is ready and we can finally get started on cutting the actual fabric. There's just one more thing that I want to add to my pattern. In your case you don't have to do it, but I'll explain why I want to do it. Now I want to add a layer of batting between the two fabrics of the outside and the inside of the vest, and that is going to create quite a thick layer, and I'm a little bit concerned about sewing all of these layers together at the shoulder seams and the side seams. So I thought about it, and I think what I want to do is I actually want to create an overlapping pattern pieces. So instead of sewing the pattern pieces together like this, we are going to overlap them. And for that, I need to add a little bit at the shoulder seam and a little bit at the side seam to create that overlap. To make this happen, first I have closed the dart on my front pattern piece. It just makes it easier to work with it. And then I'm going to add about an inch and a half extension to the side seam first, and then we will tidy up these edges, and we will do the same at the shoulder seam. Of course, don't forget that we will need to do this on the back pattern piece as well. Now finally I can give my fabric a really good press to prepare it for cutting, and I will be using this cotton linen blend for both the inside and the outside of my vest. As I mentioned before, I want to create a 3-layer sandwich with a cotton batting in the middle between the 2 layers of fabric. Now because of that, instead of cutting out an actual pattern pieces out, I will be cutting out rectangles first that are big enough to fit those pattern pieces, because our first step is going to be to quilt it. To do that, I usually use a heat erasable pen or any other marking tool and my ruler, and then I mark diagonal lines so that way I know exactly where to quilt. After the lines are marked, I head to the sewing machine and start the actual quilting. In my case, I'm doing it just with a straight stitch, and usually I increase the stitch length so that way it goes a little bit smoother through all of the layers. Currently, I'm quilting the back pattern piece, which is pretty straightforward. For the front pattern piece, it's a little bit different because there I have a dart. Here I'm starting by marking the dart position on all 3 rectangles for one front pattern piece. After I have pinned the darts, let's sew them. Now when the dart is done, I will go ahead and press them. I will press one of them up, the other one down, and the dart on the batting, here we're actually going to cut it apart so that way we can press the seam allowances flat and reduce the bulk. After completing this, I'm going to place all 3 layers carefully together, making sure that they all align at the dart point and the dart end. After that, all of the steps are going to be the same as we did for the back pattern piece. So first I'm marking the quilting lines and then of course quilting it. Let me show you the final result on the pattern pieces with the darts. Once all of my rectangles are quilted, it is time to cut the actual pattern pieces out. And in my plan, I have decided that I'm going to finish the edges of this vest with bias tape. Therefore, I actually don't need to add any seam allowances at all, since at the shoulders and at the side seams, we're going to be using the overlap technique. So I'm just cutting out the pattern pieces as they are. Alright, now that we have cut all of the pattern pieces, let's go ahead and put them together. First, we're going to take our back pattern piece and one of the front pattern pieces. Here at the shoulder seams, I have marked the 1/2 inch extension line that we drafted on the pattern. Now we're going to place one on top of another, pin and sew right on the marked line. And here it is once it's sewn. Now we have to close up the raw edges, and I already completed one of the shoulders, so let me show you how it looks once done. It's really nice and neat from both sides. So to get that done, we will need to grab a piece of bias tape that's about 1 inch wide. Next, working from the right side of the garment, I will take the bias tape and place it on top, aligning it with the raw edge of one of the pattern pieces. And then I'm going to pin it and we're going to sew it. We're going to sew it through all of the layers, basically repeating the same stitch that we just did while overlapping the front and the back at the shoulder seam. It will look like this once done. Next, we need to trim the seam allowance just a little bit, flip the bias tape over the raw edge, and then stitch down again. Now to enclose the raw edge from the inside of the vest, all of the steps are going to be exactly the same. The only difference is that when you align the edge of the bias tape with the raw edge of the seam allowance, don't stitch through all of the layers, stitch just through the seam allowance itself, so that way that seam isn't showing on the right side of the garment. Once you flip over the seam allowance and enclose it, I also prefer stitching it down with hand sewing stitches for exactly the same reason, so that way it doesn't show on the right side of the garment. Now after the shoulder seams have been done from both sides, now it is time to finish up all of the other raw edges of this vest, also with bias tape. Now you can of course opt for buying bias tape from the store, but I really enjoy making my own. This time I decided to make it from white cotton poplin. I also didn't fold and press this bias tape. Instead, I left it as a strip, and I started by attaching it from the wrong side of the vest with about 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is quite a lengthy process because all of the raw edges from the neckline down the center front, side seams, armholes, and the back pattern piece, all of that needs to be done with bias tape. To finish this edge, now I need to pull the bias tape to the right side of the garment, tuck it under so that way all of the raw edges are enclosed evenly, and then give it a really good press. After that, pin and of course head back to the sewing machine to top stitch it from the right side. Alright, so all of the bias tape is attached. This is what we have so far. So now all we have to do is overlap the side seam. If you want to, you can pin it first and then try it on. Maybe you want to overlap it just a tad more, maybe just a tad less. So you can definitely do that. And as always, there's a couple of ways how you can do it. The first decision that we need to make is how to overlap, front over back or back over front. And I think I will go for front over back. And then we need to measure the width of the overlap. In my case, it was about 1.5 inches. And then we can clip it or pin it. I'm choosing to clip because there's just so many layers, it's really hard to pin. Once that is done, the other decision that we need to make is how are we going to stitch it down. Option number 1 is to do it on a sewing machine on one side and on the other side. Option number 2 would be to do it entirely by hand. Option number 3 would be to do one side on a sewing machine, the side that's facing out, and to do the rest by hand. I think I like the option 3 the most, so that's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to stitch it down right here on the edge of this bias tape. The other side, as mentioned previously, I'm going to stitch down with hand sewing needle and thread. After this, the final thing is to attach a closure, for which I made a button and a loop from the same fabric as the vest itself. And that's it! Now let's take a look at the final result. I will say that in my book it's definitely a winner. It's simple, yet it looks good, it's practical, it's comfortable, plus it goes really well with a lot of things that I already have in my wardrobe, which is definitely something that I aim for whenever I make a new garment. Now, if you're craving a little bit more of a complicated and more adventurous sewing journey, that I have one for you right over here, definitely click right over here to see how this jacket came together from 6 different fabrics, primarily made from fabric scraps. Thank you so much for watching this So Easy episode, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!